Hello, it's an honor to be here. I'm Dr. Rivers, and this is my research partner, Dr. Greenes. Welcome to our TED Talk.
Today we are here to speak to you about a widespread environmental issue that is gaining attention of environmental scientists across the globe, ocean acidification.
No, that does not mean the oceans are actually turning into acid.
But it does mean that they are potentially becoming an inhospitable environment for many organisms.
So, what is ocean acidification? Well, to understand that, let's chat pH levels real quick. As I'm sure you all remember from your basic biology classes, pH is the concentration of hydrogen ions in a solution. So, the more basic a solution, the higher on the scale. The opposite is also true. The more acidic, the lower. Well, right now our oceans are sitting around a comfortable 8. So relating back to ocean acidification, what we have is the decrease in pH levels of the ocean resulting from the excess CO2 in the environment.
This is worrying to scientists because in approximately the last 250 years, we have seen a decrease from 8.2 to 8.1. Why is this decrease concerning, Dr. Rivers?
Well, the ocean habitat is a delicate balance, and altering this main component could have detrimental effects on the entire ecosystem because it will have its greatest impact at the bottom of the food chain. This means the foundation on which the ecosystem sits will be weakened.
That's really scary. Let's take a step back and explore this more in detail. So we know that it's the excess CO2 in the environment causing this acidification, but why now? Where did all this CO2 come from? The simple answer is excessive greenhouse gases in the environment from anthropogenic activities.
Hang on a second, Dr. Greenes. You might be asking yourself, what the heck does anthropogenic even mean? Well, simply put, it's a long word that means caused by human activity.
Back to the CO2. According to the United States Environmental Protection Agency, carbon dioxide accounts for 81.6% of the total greenhouse gases resulting from human activities in the U.S.
Here is a handy breakdown of the different sources that account for these emissions. As you can see, a significant portion comes down to everyday activities such as transportation and electricity. It is important to note, however, that a major component of the emissions from electricity is due to the burning of fossil fuels to actually generate that electricity.
So now that you know a little bit of the background, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what is actually happening with the CO2 that is causing this acidification.
When the CO2 is absorbed by the water, it dissociates into carbonic acid, which further dissociates into hydrogen ions and carbonate ions. It's those pesky extra hydrogen ions that are responsible for the acidification.
The oceans have taken in 25% of all the CO2 released since the Industrial Revolution. As we said earlier, that has resulted in a decrease from 8.2 to 8.1. While that might not seem like much, we have to consider that the fact that the pH scale is logarithmic, meaning each change of 0.1 is equal to a 10 times change. So that is actually equal to a 26% decrease to the overall pH.
Research testing various scenarios of atmospheric CO2 concentrations have been used to predict future potential pH levels. Unfortunately, this red line symbolizes our current path, which estimates a change to the pH level of 0.3 to 0.2, or 151 to 216% increase in acidity by the year 2100. Luckily, this change isn't set in stone, and as you can see, if we reduce our carbon footprint, we can lessen these effects.
Those are some serious implications, but I get it. Right now, it just sounds like numbers.
So let's talk real consequences. Obviously, ocean acidification is going to affect different organisms in different ways. But for time's sake, we're going to focus on 3 types of animals today. First, we're going to take a look at the pteropods.
Pteropods are tiny open ocean snails that build their shells out of calcium carbonate. As the oceans become more acidic, these carbonate ions are bound by CO2, causing difficulty for the snails to build their shells.
Additionally, hydrogen ions in the water have a stronger attractive force to the carbonate ions than calcium does. So these extra hydrogen ions essentially pull carbon out of existing shells, which causes them to break apart or dissolve. Obviously, pteropods can't live without the protection of their shells. So ocean acidification is a big deal for these little guys.
Similarly to pteropods, corals rely on carbonate ions in the ocean to build their skeletons. As the oceans become undersaturated with respect to carbonate, corals are effectively prevented from building their skeletons. Beyond calcification, we have seen some other very legitimate concerns about the survival of many coral species with continued ocean acidification. A study on Acropora palmata coral found that elevated CO2 compromised early development by reducing fertilization, settlement success, and post-settlement growth. This resulted in an overall decrease of 52 to 73% larval establishment on the reef. These results can help us understand how other corals that have similar life stages could respond to the effects of ocean acidification.
So we've talked about calcifiers and corals, but what about fish? I'm afraid I have some bad news for you Nemo fans. Many fish, including clownfish, use chemical cues in the water to avoid predation. A recent study found that clownfish larvae developed in water containing 850 parts per million CO2, which is roughly the level predicted for 2100, were actually attracted to the predator cues. An even more startling find was that clownfish that had been developed in control water for over a week and then transferred to the water containing 850 parts per million similarly began spending the majority of their time in the water that contained the predator cue.
These findings support the hypothesis that elevated CO2 impairs the olfactory senses in many fish, effectively increasing their mortality rates. Considering future CO2 projections, this behavior could have serious ramifications for species sustainability. What's more, if this responsive behavior is seen widespread throughout marine species, the effects could be detrimental to the diversity of our oceans.
So we could only talk about a few, but there are a ton of different organisms in our oceans. And what's pretty wild is that they all play a huge role in maintaining balance in the life of the ocean. The pteropod might not seem like the MVP of the aquatic world, but for animals like fish and salmon, it's a huge part of their diet. And we all know how the food web works. Just the loss of pteropods could ripple out and reduce populations of countless other animals.
Corals are an important habitat for approximately 25% of marine species. Removing corals could enable animals to be exposed to predators and stress factors that they aren't equipped to handle.
Well, this discussion got really serious very quick. But let's remember, the study of ocean acidification is still relatively new, and there's a lot about it that we just don't know. For example, we've seen the effects of CO2 on different species, such as coral, but we're still trying to understand the reasoning why these are the results.
What we do know is that the severity of future predictions is not set in stone. However, it is important that humanity as a whole begins to make changes now. It all starts with you at home and in the audience. Little adjustments like walking, biking, taking public transportation, preserving electricity use, and switching to environmentally friendly alternatives, along with raising awareness within your families and communities, can go a long way.
These changes might not seem like a lot individually, but collectively, we can make a big difference. Thank you so much. We hope this has been informative.
It's been a pleasure.